Hey folks, welcome to one of the nerdiest videos I will probably ever do. So, as a lot of you know, if you watch my stuff regularly, I am a pro wrestling fan. And one thing you might not know about my pro wrestling fandom is that as a part of that, I'm a little bit of a championship belt nerd. And I say little bit because I don't want to exaggerate the level of my belt nerddom lest the really diehard belt nerds proclaim me to be a poser. Um, but I have opinions, all right? I notice championship belts and I have feelings and thoughts about which ones I like and which ones I don't and why. So, that being the case, I was particularly interested to learn that this past Monday night on WWE's flagship TV show, Monday Night Raw, they introduced a new championship belt, a new version of the world title, yet another new version of the world title. I think since 2002, maybe 2003, they have introduced three different new versions of the world title or of a world title level championship. And it's like, that's like 20 years, but for wrestling, 20 years is not that long of a time. You know, wrestling companies, like very long lived wrestling companies like WWE, tend to favor long championship lineages that go back years and years and decades because it makes the titles feel more important, you know? So to introduce not one, two, but three new versions of a world level championship in the space of about 20 years, that's a lot. This is the all new WWE World Championship belt that was introduced just recently on Raw. And here actually is another look at it. And as you can see, it has World Champion on the top and the bottom. And then in the middle of the plate is a big old WWE logo superimposed over a tilted globe. And the main plate is this big gold, ridiculously embellished plate with the two side plates on either side. The design of the belt has generated a lot of talk, a lot of opinions. Most people, other than there are the hardcore WWE marks that just reflexively, uncritically love everything and think that the new title looks great and they love it. And then there are the people who are sort of on the opposite side, who are the reactionary haters who just hate everything automatically. And because it's new, they're like, oh, I hate it, it sucks. And then there are people like me who are kind of in the middle, who are trying to form some kind of honest opinion about whether or not we like how this title looks. And for me, it's kind of tough because on the one hand, I don't really like the design. It feels kind of slapped together. It feels like they just took the Ric Flair big gold world title belt and then just hammered a big WWE logo into the middle of it. But on the other hand, the design choices that clearly went into creating this belt and giving this belt the look that it has do make sense. Doesn't mean I like them or I agree with them, but they do make sense. They do fit a pattern that we can also see in the designs of other championship belts, not just in WWE, but in other wrestling companies as well. So I want to talk about that a little bit because I think that's kind of interesting. The first pattern, obviously, that the new WWE World title fits is, as I mentioned before, its design is obviously based predominantly on what is called the big gold belt. And that's this one right here. This is the belt that was given to Ric Flair in 1986 when he was the NWA, National Wrestling Alliance, World Heavyweight Champion. This belt was presented to Ric Flair as a gift to him in recognition of him being a long-time great champion and a great main eventer and a great attraction in wrestling in the 1980s. So this was the new NWA World Heavyweight title belt. And then it also came to represent the WCW world title when WCW broke away from the NWA and became its own thing and declared its own world champion. That title was also represented by this belt. So this is one of the most famous wrestling championship belts that there has ever been. It's one of the most recognizable championship belts in all of professional wrestling. And of course, when WCW was purchased by the WWE in 2001, this title was used to represent the WCW World title. And then several years later, when the WWE introduced its, I guess actually about a year later in 2002, when the WWE introduced its own new version of the world title, it was also represented by this belt. And then eventually WWE came up with its own variation on the big gold belt, which is this one, which is basically the same design, only it doesn't have it's not dual plated. As you might have noticed, the original big gold belt, here's another shot of the original big gold belt. The original big gold belt is dual plated. That means that it has both gold and silver on the plate. And the WWE version is not dual plated. It's just gold on the plate completely. So that's the WWE version. It's the same basic design. The only difference is the plate has a bit of a curve to it instead of being a flat plate, and it has the WWE logo up at the top instead of just the filigree at the top that the original big gold belt had. So that's the WWE version, and clearly that and the original are the basis for the new version. So there's a sort of design lineage that went into the designing of this belt that makes a kind of sense. Whether you like it or not, it makes sense. And there's another element of the belt, of the new belt, that attaches it to a design lineage as well, a separate design lineage from the one that comes from the big gold belt. And that is more exclusive or unique to WWE itself. And that it has to do with the big WWE logo here in the middle of it. Compare that to the current design for the WWE's, or one of the WWE's secondary titles, which is the Intercontinental title. This is the belt that is currently used to represent the Intercontinental title. And you can see in the middle of this belt, there is also the WWE logo inside of a globe. So this belt and the new WWE World title that was just introduced, they have that design element in common. And that design element also goes back to a belt that WWE no longer uses. It was actually moved to WWE's developmental brand, NXT, and then was eventually unified with another one of its secondary titles. But while it was being used, there was this belt, the WWE Cruiserweight title. And you can see it also has the same design, the WWE logo in the center, and it's enclosed in a globe. So these design elements sort of tie those belts together. You can see that it's kind of an attempt to take the classic big gold belt and mash it together with more recent design elements that have been used throughout newer WWE Championship belt designs. The WWE logo in the dead center of the main plate, surrounded by a globe. So the problem with the new belt, I think, is that it takes both of those design elements that make sense and that have a certain amount of history, right? The big gold plate and the WWE logo and a globe in the center, and it just kind of mushes them together. And I feel like if they wanted to come up with a design for a new belt that had elements that harkened back and sort of visually tied it in with celebrated past belt designs, surely there were more elegant ways of doing that. Now, I am not a design major. I have no specific training or expertise or eye even really for visual design. I notice things and I know what I like, right? And it just seems to me, even in my unstudied opinion, it seems to me like there must have been a better way for them to create a belt design that would make sense without just doing it as inelegantly as they do here. I'll try to give you some examples from past championships in the WWE/WWF specifically that illustrate what I'm talking about. So when we look at past championship belts in WWE, the one that most fans think of with the most fondness is this one, which is the belt that represented the WWF Championship from about 1988 through around 1998. So for about 10 years, this was the WWF/WWE. Although I think for the entirety of the period that this belt was used, the company was called the WWF, but it was this title. This was the belt. It's called the Winged Eagle. And this belt was made famous by Hulk Hogan, who was the first champion to wear it. It was also the belt that Bret Hart wore. It's the belt that Ric Flair wore when he came to the WWF in the early 90s and became the champion after he won the Royal Rumble. Here's another view of it. And yeah, it's a classic championship belt. And it's called the Winged Eagle because obviously there's a big eagle in the center of the main plate. You can see the eagle's wings stretched out, and then the eagle's head is over top of the globe in the center, and the globe is blue. There's gold in the continents of the globe, and then the sea, the oceans are represented by blue. And that is a really strong, very obvious, very prominent design element for that belt. And for several years in the WWF in the 80s and the 90s, that element of an eagle and an eagle's wings was something that was shared by other championships in the company. For example, here is another one of the more famous WWE Championship designs. This is the belt that was used for many years to represent the WWF Tag Team Championship. And as you can see, it has a couple of elements in common with the Winged Eagle WWF Championship belt. It has the globe with the continents being gold and the ocean being painted blue. And then, like the Winged Eagle, it also has an eagle on the belt. Unlike the Winged Eagle, this eagle on the tag title belt is not in front of the globe. It's above it as though perching on it. But that is still an element that it has in common with the Winged Eagle. And this eagle is also spreading its wings. And it's a very prominent, very definitive element of this design. And it sort of ties the designs of those two belts together. So even though they look very different in many ways, the tag team title belt and the Winged Eagle belt have some things in common, have some elements that tie them together and make them feel like maybe they're part of the same universe, that they're part of a cohesive design lineage. And there's other elements as well. There's, as I mentioned, the coloring in the globe, and there are also these banners that serve to hold the text on the main plate. The World Heavyweight is in gold lettering over a black background, and Wrestling Champion at the bottom as well. And they are held in these banners, especially the bottom section of the main plate where it says Wrestling Champion. That's in the image or in the shape of a banner. And there's another very famous WWF Championship belt that uses that design, and that is, of course, the original, not the original, but the classic 1980s into the 1990s Intercontinental title belt. And again, that's the one I showed you a little bit earlier. This is the current version of the Intercontinental Championship, and the one that was probably the most famous, that fans my age remember the most fondly, is this version. And here's another look at it, at that design. This is the version of the Intercontinental title that was held by some of the most famous Intercontinental champions in the 80s and 90s when that belt really held a lot of prestige. Macho Man Randy Savage, Ricky Steamboat, the Honky Tonk Man, the Ultimate Warrior, Rick Rude, Mr. Perfect, Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, Owen Hart, Steve Austin, on and on and on. It's the Intercontinental title belt that some of the most famous and most important Intercontinental champions held. And as you can see, just like with the Winged Eagle WWF title, the Intercontinental title has a globe in the center with the ocean painted blue while the continents are represented by gold. And the text on the main plate is carried in banners. There's this straight banner that curves across the top that says Intercontinental. And then down below are these curved banners with the forked edges that say Heavyweight Wrestling Champion. And again, that is a design element that it has in common with the Winged Eagle belt. So there are design elements that tie those titles together, right? But in ways that you don't feel like you're being beaten over the head with it. It's not super obvious, but if you look at them side to side and you look at them together, you see them at various times on the same wrestling show, and they make sense. They feel like they belong together, and there's an elegance to them and a unity to them without making them feel or look like they're just carbon copies of each other. Now, that is another bad habit that the WWF has gotten into recently, where their championship belts just start to look like carbon copies of each other. For example, here is the current design of the WWE title. That's what the WWE title looks like. And it's not a bad design. I know a lot of people were critical of it when they first introduced it, but I think that it's a perfectly fine looking title belt. Here's another one, another look at it. It's a neat design. I kind of like how the main plate has a lot of open space and allows the black leather strap to show through behind. And it's really dominated by the WWE logo. Talk about company branding. The WWE logo is almost the entirety of the plate, and then down below is the text World Heavyweight Champion. So that's the WWE title, the current version. And here is what the Universal title looks like. Basically the exact same design, only instead of a black strap, it has a blue strap, and then down below, instead of World Heavyweight Champion, it says Universal Champion, but it's essentially the exact same design. It has a blue strap because this title is currently exclusive to the SmackDown show. When the Universal title was introduced in 2016, it was exclusive to Monday Night Raw, and the branded color for Raw is red. So this is what it looked like when it was first introduced on Raw. It was red, but they're the exact same design as the WWE title. They feel like carbon copies of each other. They don't feel like necessarily a unified set of belts that share common design elements. They're literally the exact same belt. It would be nice if for their new world title, they had found a way to incorporate this shared design element of the WWE logo in the center enclosed in a globe that it shares in common with the current Intercontinental title and with the previous Cruiserweight title, but found a way to do that in a way that was a little bit more, original or tasteful or elegant. I keep using that word. And there are a couple of examples of that being done in past wrestling belts, not for the WWF, but for other companies that I think have worked fairly well, that I can show you as an example. Let's start with this. This is one of the most famous championship belts in pro wrestling history. This is called the Lou Thez belt, and this belt used to represent the NWA World Heavyweight title. In the 1940s and 50s, this belt represented the NWA World title. And it's called the Lou Thez belt because it was most famously worn by the great Lou Thez. There's another look at it, who was the NWA World Champion for many years and held the title on numerous different occasions. And you can see it even has his name on it. This was the Lou Thez belt, and it's still revered today as one of the great designs of a world championship belt or a championship belt in professional wrestling. And because it is so celebrated, it has also been imitated in a lot of ways. And in some cases, it has just flat out been imitated. It's just been copied. But it has also been used as inspiration for subsequent designs. For example, let's look at, there's the Luthez belt, and let's compare that to the belt that is currently used to represent one of the great championships internationally in wrestling, one of the great championships in the history of pro wrestling, and that is the All Japan Pro Wrestling Triple Crown title. That's the top championship in All Japan Pro Wrestling, which is one of the two top pro wrestling companies in Japan, the other being New Japan. This is the Triple Crown belt, and it is a single belt that actually stands for 3 different championships. And the main plate stands for the PWF World Heavyweight title, which was the Pacific Wrestling Federation, which was the one of the companies that preceded the creation of All Japan. And the main plate, as you can see, which is based strongly on the PWF Heavyweight Championship, was in turn based on the Thez belt. There are a lot of the same elements in this plate as were on the Luthez belt. There's the crown at the top. There's the arrangement of the text, again, in banners. There's the double globe in the center, the star at the bottom. That's all that's taken exactly from the PWF main plate, and it is based strongly on the design of the Luthez belt. Of course, the Luthez belt has a wrestling ring in the center instead of a double globe, but the shape of it, the crown at the top, the arrangement of the text, you can see that there's a lot of inspiration from the Luthez belt that went into the Triple Crown title, which is also based on the original PWF title belt. Without quite looking like a carbon copy, because there are some embellishments. It's built out a little to make the plate look a little more substantial, a little more impressive. And the belt itself also, in addition to the main plate, there are the side plates and there's the studding on the strap between the plates. So there are elements to set it apart, but also to make sure that it is unmistakable where the design of this belt comes from, what it's harkening back to, what it is trying to evoke. And there's another even better example of doing that without making a carbon copy of something, in a belt that is one of my favorite championship belts from wrestling from the last probably 10 or 15 years. Unfortunately, it's no longer used, but that is this version of the Ring of Honor World Championship. This is called the Luthez version of the Ring of Honor Championship belt because it is based on the Luthez belt as well. Here's another shot of it here. You can get a better look at the main plate, and I think this one is probably the best look of all. I think this is technically a picture of a replica of the belt. It's not the actual belt that was used in the ring or on TV, but it's the same design, so you get a good idea of what it looks like. And as you can see, like the Thez belt, it has the world's heavyweight wrestling champion in banners at the top. This row of text right here where it says Ring of Honor, that's where it said Luthez on the Luthez belt. There's the Ring of Honor logo in the center as opposed to the globes or the wrestling ring. But just as the Luthez belt had a wrestling ring in this portion in the center, the Ring of Honor belt has a wrestling ring down at the bottom in this area where there was a star in the Thez belt. It has some embellishments of its own. There's the laurel wreaths on either side, which is a very common feature of modern wrestling belts, in which I really like the jewels set into the plate, the studding on either side of the main plate on the leather strap to separate it from the side plates, which is where we find the globes on this version. And yeah, it's clearly based on the Thez belt. That's obviously where the inspiration comes from, but it is not a carbon copy of the Thez belt. It takes elements of the Thez belt and it uses them as kind of a starting point and then adds its own features, builds it out, expands it, makes it look a little bigger, a little more impressive, a little heavier, and does its own thing with it. And I think it would have been nice if the new WWF World title had found a way, if the designers of that belt had found a way to do something similar with that. If they could have found a way to, if they wanted to use the big gold belt, the Ric Flair belt, as inspiration, that's fine. But they didn't want to literally just use that belt again. They wanted to have a new belt, but that was based on that design. I think that would have been great. But maybe they could have found a way to to do a variation on that felt new, but also still clearly bore the marks of its inspiration, but that was a little more original, a little more creative than just taking the big gold belt and then just hammering the WWE logo onto the front of it, which I know is not literally what they did, but it kind of feels like that's what they did. Or, and I think this would have been a much more interesting way to go, design a completely new world heavyweight title belt. Don't harken back to the big gold belt. The big gold belt is again one of the most celebrated championship belts that's ever been in wrestling. Everybody loves the big gold belt. The big gold belt is legendary. So just allow it to have its place in history, to be a celebrated, renowned, beloved belt design, but just leave it over there on the shelf where it belongs in its place of honor. And if you're going to create a new world title, make a new belt and keep that design element of the WWE logo inside of a globe in the center of the main plate, and do a version of a world title that is not exactly the same, but is analogous to what was done with the Intercontinental Championship. So that, I mean, look, this is the current Intercontinental Championship. This is the classic version. Not a whole lot in common between these two designs. The classic Intercontinental title, current Intercontinental title, same title representing the same championship, very little in common between these two designs. They could have done the same thing with a new world title. They could have done this version of a new world championship, but not necessarily make it look exactly like this. You know, make it look different, but do the same kind of thing and incorporate the WWE logo in the globe in the center. Incorporate this sort of style, which you can see it's kind of what they did with the center and the text in the new world title. Here's the new world title again. And you can see the text looks the same, top and bottom in sort of round rows. And then of course the globe and the WWE logo, but they just kind of smashed it into a main plate that is obviously based on the big gold. And it just, I don't know, it just doesn't look right. I wish they had just abandoned the big gold elements entirely and just made a WWE World Championship that looked a little more like that, or was designed with that same kind of thought process in mind, so that it looked like something new and fresh and shared these kinds of design elements in common with the Intercontinental title, but was its own thing instead of obviously trying to simultaneously be a riff on this and a riff on the big gold, because they don't combine very harmoniously, do they? I just, it's not the worst looking world championship belt I've ever seen. It's not even the worst looking wrestling belt currently in use. In fact, it's not even the worst looking world championship wrestling belt that is currently in use. I will show you what I think is the worst looking world championship wrestling belt currently in use, and then I will end this video because I feel like I've been droning on about this way too long. But anyway, so here is what I would say is the worst looking wrestling championship belt currently being used certainly by a major company. This is it right here. This is the IWGP World Heavyweight title. And this is the top championship in New Japan Pro Wrestling. Remember, I mentioned All Japan Pro Wrestling earlier. Well, the other major wrestling company in Japan is New Japan, and its top title is the IWGP World Heavyweight title, which is represented by this belt. Here's another view of it here. That's actually, I think, a replica, but you can get the idea of what the design looks like. And it's just not, there's all kinds of things about this design that I really just don't like. I don't like the shape of the main plate. I don't like the way the black strap is cut out to match the shape of the main plate. I really don't like this element here where the main plate's sides are cut at an angle to make this sort of shield shape, but the studs on either side are set in straight vertical lines, and it just doesn't look good. There's this wedge area here that just doesn't look right, and the studs line up with the edge of the side plates, but they don't line up with the edge of the main plate. And I just think visually, it just doesn't look very appealing. There's the other look at it there. It just doesn't look right. The real test of whether or not a wrestling belt looks good to me is how it looks around the waist of a wrestler. So let's look at how it looks around the waist of one of the great wrestlers in the entire world right now, the guy who held this title until very recently. He just lost it a couple of weeks ago, actually. The former IWGP World Heavyweight Champion, Kazuchika Okada. And it just doesn't look right, does it? At least I don't think so. Maybe you disagree, but there's Okada from last year's Wrestle Kingdom wearing the IWGP World Heavyweight title. And you can see it just when he's got it around his waist, there's just too much negative space, too much of the strap showing with nothing there. And then the slanted line here and the straight line here with the studs going straight up and down. It just doesn't look right to me. Here's another shot of Okada wearing, and you can see it also, because the main plate has a slanted edge and then the side plates and the studs have a straight vertical edge, it tends to kind of buckle in this area here where it's just the strap. The strap tends to kind of bend and buckle and lean forward, and it just doesn't look very good around a wrestler's waist. And by the way, here's the belt that this belt replaced. Here's the current IWGP World title again. And the IWGP World title was a replacement for the IWGP Heavyweight title, which was previously the top belt in New Japan. They renamed it the IWGP World Heavyweight title when the IWGP Heavyweight title was unified with the IWGP Intercontinental title. All these lineages. But anyway, this is what the belt used to look like. This is the belt that used to represent the top title. This was the IWGP Heavyweight Championship. And this is one of my favorite wrestling belts ever. I love this belt. It's a gorgeous belt. I really miss the champion wearing this belt. This was really a cool World Heavyweight title belt, the IWGP Heavyweight Championship. And you can see it also has a dual plating. It's gold and silver. And the IWGP logo is in the center, superimposed over a map of the world with the continents in gold and the water in silver. And then along the top and the bottom, enclosed in banners with the banners being gold and the text being inlaid and in silver, heavyweight champion. And then a little plate underneath for the current champion's name to be. And then the studding on either side. It's a really, really nice looking belt. It's an asymmetrical plate. It comes up above the top line of the strap a little bit more than it comes below the bottom line of the strap. So it gives it sort of a crown-like effect without being super obvious about that. It's just a gorgeous belt. I really, really like it. And its replacement is this fucking thing. I just don't like it. I just don't think it's a very nice belt. So as much as I am not so sure about the new WWE World title belt, as much as I think that maybe they could have and should have done a better job than this, at least this is a better looking belt, a better design, a more attractive design than this. Could always be worse, I suppose. But anyway, that's my little journey into the finer points of wrestling championship belt nerddom. I hope some of you found this interesting, informative, entertaining, whatever. It's one of the nerdiest things about me, that I have these kinds of opinions and thoughts and specific ideas about professional wrestling championship belt design. But I hope you dug this and found this to be of some use. And thank you so much for watching. And I will see you next time for a video about a subject that is that is not nearly this idiosyncratic. But thank you for paying attention and sticking with me, those of you who did nonetheless. Bye, everybody. See you next time.